Namaskar. Welcome to the session on the blog titled Non-Fictional Prose, which forms part of the course Indian English Literature. Earlier, I outlined some basic features of non-fictional texts, highlighted the points of intersection between fiction and non-fiction, and discussed Amitav Ghosh's essay Stories in Stone. We also discussed how several celebrated writers of fiction are equally accomplished authors of non-fiction and carefully employ the techniques of one genre in another. In this lecture, we shall continue from where we had left and closely examine another essay of Ghosh prescribed in your syllabus titled Dancing in Cambodia. This essay was first published in 1993 in Granta, a journal published from Cambridge, and the essay links the king of Cambodia Sisowat's visit to France with a troupe of classical dancers in 1906 with the more recent history of the catastrophic Khmer Rouge revolution that witnesses unprecedented brutality between 1975 and 1979. Let me quote an insightful observation from a master storyteller here to begin with. A story has no beginning or end. Arbitrarily, one chooses that moment of experience from which to look back or from which to look ahead, wrote Graham Greene in the novel titled The End of the Affair. This was published in 1951. One cannot but agree with Greene's views except that the choice of beginning a story with a certain moment or ending it for that matter may not always be arbitrary. Greene's observation in the context of fiction also holds true in the case of non-fiction. This thus emphasizes that an author inescapably needs fictional strategies in order to narrativize facts so that the elusive meanings can be drawn out properly. Academic history tends to underplay and sometimes resists the many alternative ways in which facts can be arranged and interpreted. I have already stressed in my previous lecture how writers often play with the chronological order of events to build suspense in their narrative. Amitav Ghosh deftly deploys this strategy in both his fiction and non-fiction. Dancing in Cambodia opens with a dramatic description of the euphoria that engulfs France upon the arrival of the king of Cambodia in Marseille. King Sisowat was accompanied by a troupe of nearly 100 classical dancers and musicians from the royal palace at Phnom Penh. The second section suddenly jumps to 1993. From 1906, it jumps to 1993 when Ghosh visited Cambodia, by which time some semblance of peace had been restored with the help of the United Nations and elections were being held under the auspices of UNTAC or United Nations Transitional Authority in Cambodia. The subsequent sections, it's a fairly long essay and has 15 sections altogether. So, the subsequent sections explore the changes the Cambodian society experienced in the intervening years, concentrating especially on Khmer Rouge years, otherwise known as Pol Pot years, that spanned from 1975 to 1979. And during which period nearly 1 million Cambodians were massacred. 1/4 of the country's entire population perished. For a vividly dramatic rendering of Cambodia during these years, you may watch Roland Jobs' classic film The Killing Fields, which won several Oscars in 1984. The essay Amitav Ghosh's essay ends on a hopeful note of human resilience and endeavor to overcome catastrophic calamities, with Cambodians piecing together whatever they could collect from the debris to organize a concert. As in Stories in Stone, Ghosh creates in Dancing in Cambodia a host of flesh and blood characters and presents to readers their experiences. Some of these characters are built through archival research of early 20th century French newspapers, and some others are carved out of the memories of people Ghosh interacted with in 1993. Ghosh links the story of the land with memories of ordinary individuals, which enables him to offer an account strikingly different from the ones we come across in unilinear histories. His novelistic imagination also helps him create characters who are multidimensional and capable of surprising the reader through taking unexpected decisions and actions. It may help us if we follow the narrative through the experiences of these characters. And for your benefit, I am presenting a list of major characters in the essay here. King Sisowat, his eldest daughter Princess Sompadhi, Chia Sami, who as a child had met both the king and the princess and whom Ghosh met in 1993, Molika, Amitav Ghosh's friend and a civil servant who interpreted Ghosh's conversation with Chia Sami, Yong Salot Sar, who later became known as the Pol Pot, Eva Misliwek, an American Quaker who was among the first foreign relief workers to arrive in Cambodia after the Pol Pot regime in 1980 and became a legend. Kyon Mum, the grandson of a minister of King Sisowat and who exercised considerable influence on Pol Pot during his years of struggle as a student in Paris. An unnamed Bangladeshi sergeant who was teaching Cambodian soldiers professional demining techniques. Sros, a young Cambodian who helped Ghosh reach Pol Pot's village, and Auguste Rodin, the celebrated French sculptor who became enamored of the Cambodian dance form and obsessively followed the Royal Cambodian troupe. A mesmerized Rodin later wrote, and I quote this from Ghosh's text, "These Cambodians have shown us everything that antiquity could have contained. It is impossible to think of anyone wearing human nature to such perfection, except them and the Greeks." I end quote. All these characters are not presented as disembodied figures from pages of history, but are depicted as possessing individualized human traits. Consider the following thumbnail sketches of a few characters from the essay. And I quote, "My friend Molika was a mid-level civil servant, poised, attractive woman in her early 30s, painfully soft-spoken in the Khmer way. Similarly, Chia Sami was sitting on a bench in the school's vast training hall, a small woman with a kind of poise that goes with the confidence of great beauty. She was dressed in ankle-length skirt and her grey hair was cut short. She smiled in the indulgent, misty way in which people recall a favorite aunt. And sitting regally amongst the dancers, alternatively stern and indulgent, affectionate and severe, was the slight fine-boned figure of the king's eldest daughter, Princess Sompadhi. Dressed in a gold-brown champot and a tunic of mauve silk, this redoubtable woman had an electrifying effect on the Marseille crowd. As I mentioned in my previous lecture, attribution of such recognizable traits to characters may not be a desirable feature in academic histories which aspire to be objective, but such nuanced and detailed character sketches does help the reader vividly reconstruct the scene in their imagination. Such apparently irrelevant information also contribute to the creation of a special atmosphere which is central to works of fiction. The juxtaposition of unusual or divergent events is a prominent feature in Ghosh's writing. The two trips to France, King Sisowad's royal visit and young Salotsar who went there to study, result in two strikingly contrasting consequences. Sisowat, who was already a Francophile before his arrival in the country, is awestruck when he visits Paris and tries to introduce Western education in Cambodia when he finally returns home. Decades later, it is the Paris-educated Salotsar who is inducted to the Communist Party there and is in a few years transformed into the notorious Pol Pot. It is in France that Salotsar picks up, and I quote from this telling phrase of Amitav Ghosh, and he picks up the tools of a moderately rational form of social science. While the whole of France is euphoric about the dance form of Cambodia in the first decade of the 20th century, during the reign of Pol Pot, all forms of cultural expression, including classical dance, are banned. Many artists were slaughtered and many others died of hard work, starvation or inhuman torture. Ghosh also recounts with unforgettable acuteness his arduous journey to Pol Pot's village, where he observes, and I quote, "With cows lowing in the gathering darkness, the journey to Paris from that village on the Seine River seemed like an extraordinary odyssey." The life of the mass murderer, that is Pol Pot, is brilliantly juxtaposed with that of one of his victims, who somehow managed to survive through his ingenuity. In the essay, one comes across a riveting story of survival of Truong Chieng during the Reign of Terror. Like Kong Sarith, who in Stories in Stone fabricates a convincing story of his having served as a waiter at a restaurant, Chieng, who played the role of Hanuman, succeeded in outwitting his cruel interrogators. This training, and I quote, in playing the role of Hanuman proved instrumental in Truong Chieng's survival. His expertise in clowning and mime helped him persuade the interrogators at his labor camp that he was an illiterate lunatic. An aspect of Ghosh's writing style I missed pointing out in my discussion of Stories in Stone relates to his frequent use of evocative imagery, which make his observation or idea more resonant. See, for instance, this description of the state of administration after the fall of the Khmer Rouge. The country was like a shattered slate. Before you could think of drawing lines on it, you had to find the pieces and fit them together. Such arresting images provide perspectives on the past which data, statistics and verifiable facts unaided by imagination will never be able to offer. These images alert us to layers of rich significance which unilinear arrangement of events and incidents can never help us explore. Finally, a word about the title may be in order. This unusual title turns one's attention away from abstractions or grand narratives towards human agents, great and small, inhabiting specific times and spaces. It is not about dance as an art form, but about people who engage in it as an intensely human activity. Therefore, the title is not Dance Forms of Cambodia, but Dancing in Cambodia. Furthermore, one should remember that the narrative begins and closes with reference to acts of dancing, which assume immense symbolic significance. I may point out here that as an activity, dance represents at once the ecstatic experience of freedom and the need for discipline and restraint. After all, this is a classical form of dance. It therefore shortly emerges as a powerful metaphor for civilization. In this particular essay, dance is presented as a vibrant mode of celebrating human resilience in the face of unimaginable human cruelty. Reading essays like Dancing in Cambodia or Stories in Stone makes us realize that the conventional distinction between fiction and non-fiction is more convenient than convincing, as the boundaries suggested between the two are often inevitably blurred. Fiction cannot exist in a world completely devoid of facts, nor can facts be presented and interpreted without the operation of the imaginative faculty. In all great works of art, one profoundly enriches the other and opens up new possibilities. It may be mentioned here that Amitav Ghosh is not alone in employing novelistic strategies to weave facts and information. One finds compelling instances of these in the works of Graham Greene and V.S. Naipaul. I have already quoted from the work of Graham Greene, and V.S. Naipaul is also part of your syllabus. You are familiar with his work. When one reads Amitav Ghosh's essay, one is reminded of Naipaul's technique of presenting the portrait of a time and place through conversations with ordinary people. Sometimes he turns his travelogues into works of fiction. Let me conclude this with a word of advice. We have already seen that non-fictional works can be as exciting and engaging as great novels. Therefore, I urge you to read more of Amitav Ghosh's works, or those of V.S. Naipaul, both fiction and non-fiction. Please do not restrict your reading to what is prescribed in the syllabus. Thank you for patiently listening to me.